Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Ted 2, starring Mark Wahlberg, Seth MacFarlane, Amanda Seyfried, Giovanni Ribisi, John Slattery, Jessica Barth, and Morgan Freeman, directed by Seth MacFarlane. Now, before I get into this, I was in this movie, filming this movie at the end. When when I get to the end of the movie, I will tell you where I was, but it will be a little bit hard to find me. And I went with a friend of mine, and I'm not going to say his name for protection reasons. And I can't show you the footage of where I was because that would be copywriting reasons. And the one that comes off surprising to me, and if you've heard me say this before, you might want to fast forward for just about 10 seconds, is Mark Wahlberg because he's like an inch shorter than I am. So, and I have seen Amanda Seyfried in person in that set too. And honestly, she came off a little shy. I don't know if it was just me or something. I couldn't tell you. But I didn't see Seth MacFarlane in person. That's what kind of was just a little disappointing in being on the set with him and Mark Wahlberg, Amanda Seyfried, and Sam Jones. We'll get there, but let's just get into this movie and so we can talk briefly about it. We start the movie off in Boston, with a narration from Patrick Stewart, where Ted, returning voice of Seth MacFarlane, marries Tammy Lynn, returned by Jessica Barth, led by Sam Jones, returning to the role of Sam Jones, and John Bennett, returned by Mark Wahlberg, is there as he's been divorced from Lori for the past 6 months, while he was at that same church he married her at, and the after wedding party, and the fact we lost Mila Kunis because she was pregnant while this movie was being filmed. And honestly, I was glad she was gone, as she was the wrong girl for John for changing him into something he wasn't. And believe me, that's what I saw in that movie last time. As Ted in the unrated version throws a glass bottle at the DJ, and we get the extended scene of the wedding of John and Ted singing the Thunder Buddy song, which is a bad idea to begin with. And that's another thing I failed to bring up. Whenever you make a sequel to a comedy or something, I have high hopes for the miniseries, keep in mind, but they're a terrible idea. Just terrible. Like, I've said this before in American Pie. If you get a sequel to a comedy where they talk about the same humor and talking the same stupid humor, I haven't liked an R-rated. Well, let me get into that later. If we get the opening credits as a musical number, and I kind of sum the weddings, and I kind of like the wedding scene, but not in the unrated version. And the musical number didn't feel original, as Seth MacFarlane has done it a ton of times on Family Guy. So that kind of annoyed me in this movie. We move on to 1 year later, and Ted and Tammy Lynn are having arguments like crazy, to the point the neighbors can fucking hear them. And this is a typical sequel to a comedy, which is why this is a bad idea to begin with. John and Ted hang out at the bar while the bartender named Allison opens up to John, and he blows her off, and Jay Leno almost gives John a blowjob in the bathroom, and these jokes are not as funny as the first time versus Family Guy. We get to the grocery store scenes, and Ted helps Liam Neeson, who feels worried about someone following him to his apartment for buying Trix, the cereal, as it's meant for kids, and he's an adult, but he can have it any time of the day. I'm not judging. And Joy notices Ted and Tammy Lynn are still not talking, advising him they should have a baby. And Ted talks to Tammy Lynn in the unrated version. They fuck the same way in the produce area in the back, and the boss decides to name the store after Ted, which is not only not funny, but very unnecessary. I think if I were to go with any version of this movie to watch, and I watched both for this review, I would say the theatrical cut, in my opinion. Fuck the unrated cut. I mean, seriously. It goes on a little too long, and it's repeating the same jokes from the first movie. Ted tells John he and Tammy Lynn are going to have a baby, and tries to email Sam Jones about making a sperm for them, as Ted goes to John's computer and sees so much motherfucking porn and smashes the computer and goes to the harbor, and they go to Sam Jones, and he unfortunately says no, and Ted throws a rock at his Chrysler. Can I say by accident? Because I don't know if this was accidental or on purpose. I couldn't tell you. And I can't believe how much these jokes don't work as much as the first film. John and Ted go to Tom Brady's house to jerk him off. No, I'm not making this up. I'm not bullshitting around. This is what they're literally doing in this movie. I swear to God. And John comes up with giving them the sperm, his sperm, I mean. And this is not making me laugh. And this is why I don't like two different things. One is the R-rated raunchy humor kind of bullshit. I haven't liked one movie with that for like at least the last 10 years. And two, the sequel to comedies, because they're a terrible idea, like I just brought up. John makes a sperm for Ted and Tammy Lynn while Ted chats with Dr. Danzer, showing Ted the other sperms from going good to bad while they throw and knock over other sperms while Ted takes a picture. And at this point, I have high hopes for the miniseries because it's a prequel. We'll see how that goes, but at this point, I'm not laughing. We move on to Donnie, returned by Giovanni Ribisi as a janitor, and in the unrated version, he makes a talking teddy bear of his own like Ted, but is unsuccessful and burns every single one of them, which makes sense for plot reasons, I guess. Ted and Tammy Lynn go to a fertility doctor who's played by Dennis Haysbert, who I know from TV stuff, and tells the truth about how much it's not going to be okay, which is fucked up for a doctor to do, and they try to adopt the child, but they can't because Ted is not a human being and is considered property, according to the state of Massachusetts, because that's where this movie was filmed. And how could he not be a person? I mean, he's moving, feeling, and talking for a little over 30 years. And Ted is unfortunately fired from his grocery store job because he's not a person while his credit cards or memberships to places are being revoked. And his marriage to Tammy Lynn doesn't exist, which sounds a hell of a lot like civil rights. And these scenes can be devastating, but I don't really like being around these characters again, which is so much like A Million Ways to Die in the West, which, fuck that movie, by the way. Ted and John plan on suing the government for his civil rights, and they go to the best lawyer in Boston, but gave his 26-year-old niece, pot smoker Samantha L., as in Leslie Jackson, played by Amanda Seyfried. And I kind of laughed at the Sam L. Jackson line, as it reminded me of Samuel L. motherfucking Jackson, as she takes the case, and they work on dealing with the case, and have a little breakfast club scene at the library with the dances and all that, and as well as having a picnic outside and talk about the case. And I'm just going to say it now. This movie is not good, nor as funny as the first movie. While in the unrated cut, we get another scene of guessing which last name to pick from movie last names, and eventually Ted picks Clubber Lang as his last name, which can be a middle and last name, sure, while John and Ted are idiots in this movie, and this is part of the reason why I don't like these characters. Donnie goes to his boss, Tom Jessup, at Mattel while he practices his Comic-Con presentation, and wants to make more Teds like what happened to John Mattel thinks of hiring a lawyer and calls Shep Wild, played by John Slattery. Why did he take this role? I don't know, and I don't give a fuck. Take their case while Tammy Lynn and Ted give John and Sam dinner at their apartment, and at the end of the scene, throw apples at people exercising, as this is fucked up in so many ways. And remind me, where the fuck is the humor, and when am I supposed to laugh? Because so far, other than the Sam L. Jackson joke, I can't laugh at this movie, as the script isn't trying to make me. The Ted versus government case in the courthouse begins, and they see Shep, and they know they're fucked, as he's the best lawyer there is in Massachusetts, and while it goes on, Tammy Lynn sasses off Shep, while John talks to both Sam and Shep about Ted's existence, while Sam first talks to Ted and sings a song about soul, while Shep asks Ted to push his chest after talking with the Mattel employee, and it goes back to saying, "I love you," in a little kid-like kind of way. Sorry if I sounded offensive that way. And it was introduced in the first film, and they go to the news program, for example, CNN, to Fox News, to talk show hosts like Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel in the unrated cut. And when I saw Kimmel, I thought, oh God, because I'm not a Jimmy Kimmel fan in general. But moving on, but these scenes are necessary as it goes on a bit too long. As I'm going to just say it now, this movie is too long, with the theatrical cut being 1 hour and 56 minutes, and the unrated cut being 2 hours and 5 minutes. This needed some editing by 20 minutes to a half hour. Unfortunately, Ted loses the case as Donnie is there while calls Patrick Meighan, played by Morgan Freeman, and he takes a meeting with them in New York, and they celebrate by going to a comedy show, and that could be cut out of the movie. Honestly, it really can be. Ted, John, and Sam head to New York and make jokes about how Sam went to Arizona State, and they stop at a diner and overhear an asshole aggressively ask customer asking for coffee, and Sam throws a cookie crisp, in his ass cheeks, as they look like assholes, as John pretends to be a kid, and goddamn, no wonder I don't like these characters. Ted drives Sam's car, and she and John are asleep, and Ted crashes the car because Ted doesn't pay attention to the road. And how could he drive terribly in the first movie, and now it's worse here as they're stranded and won't be able to get apart until the next day? Coming at night, as it's nighttime, when they get stranded and they find weed, and the John Williams score from Jurassic Park is playing in the background. And is that the best they can do? Although, to be fair, they're both from Universal, so I guess that makes sense. And the funny thing is, Jurassic World came out the same summer as this film did, and they have a nice relaxing fire, and they have a barn, and they find a barn with a gun and a guitar, as Sam plays the guitar and sings a song, and all the animals come to hear it, which seems pretty damn dumb. John and Sam kiss briefly, and they wake up the next morning while they see the car went in the barn, and they get it out of the... and in the unrated version, they get attacked by farmers while they each take some weed for the road and have a chase sequence, which is unnecessary. John takes a picture of Ted smoking weed from a bong that looks like a dick as he was sucking on it. And they get to New York, where it's Comic-Con week. And John, Ted, and Sam get to Patrick's office, and they talk, and he won't take his case as it's a hard sell. And don't get me wrong, it is. And they walk out pissed off, and I like the scenes in New York, as I've been there, but it's been a little over 20 years, I would say. So that's a plus for the movie, I guess. Devastated, Ted walks away as John and Sam comfort each other as she's the best thing that happened to each other, and Ted gets to the convention center in New York to go to Comic-Con, and this is the scene I was in. Despite taking place in New York, it was actually filmed in Los Angeles, but for copyright reasons, I can't show you where I was, which is a shame, as Ted sees Guy and his boyfriend that we met at the beginning of the movie make fun of the people who go to the Comic-Con, and Ted asks, in the unrated cut, Ted asks David Hasselhoff and his car a question, and David answers it while the car gets defensive, and Ted bumps into Donnie, cosplayed as Raphael from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and he runs for his life and steals a guy's cell phone to call John to tell him Donnie is after him, and tells him to go to Comic-Con, and Ted hides with his lookalikes as Donnie brings up Neil Diamond's song Sweet Caroline, which is sung at the Red Sox games from what I've heard, and I've seen it in other movies as well, I'll keep in mind, to get Ted, and Donnie captures Ted and gets Jessup to take him somewhere private as John and Sam magically get in the convention center, which doesn't make any sense because security is all over that shit. John and Sam bump into Sam Jones and have a fight all over the place while Donnie and Jessup almost cut Ted like he had at the end of the first film, as this feels completely deja vu until John and Sam Jackson I'm talking about, get out of the fight and catch up to Ted, while Jessup abandons Donnie and John punching Donnie, and Ted says he's sorry to John, and Ted says he's sorry to John and Sam as Sam says she's a person, and John gets hit by the Starship Enterprise from Star Trek to save Ted, while Donnie was dressed like a Ninja Turtle, cutting it down on his own. And there's 5 Ninja Turtles. That's funny because one of them is supposed to be, well, there's 2 of them that's red, but there's supposed to be 4 of them in general. And Ted brings up the song Donnie danced to from the first film and gets arrested, as this felt like a pale imitation of the first film. John is in a coma while Ted, Tammy Lynn, and Sam watches over John, and John briefly dies until the next morning, and the doctor goes with the gag saying he died by John's request, and as everybody cries for him, he wakes up and fools them, which is so not fucking funny at all, which is something you never joke about in general. While Patrick comes in and decides to take Ted's case, thanks to the footage from the TV, and they take it back to court and wins the case, as Ted is officially a person and marries Tammy Lynn and has a baby with Tammy Lynn named Apollo Creed Clubberlang. Remember, he changed his last name to Clubberlang. And throws a baby's diaper at John, which is fucking disgusting and crude. And this ending is completely unrealistic, while we get an after-credit scene with Liam Neeson putting away the tricks, all pissed off and shit. And this climax is very unconvincing at the end of the day. Jesus Christ. Now it's time for my rating. I'll give this movie a 3.0 out of 10. This movie is not only as good as the original, but it's also not as funny as the original as well. And honestly, the jokes don't make me laugh, other than the Samuel L. Jackson joke, which kind of made me laugh. This movie is too raunchy in my opinion, and honestly, I want to go back to Family Guy, which I have been doing as of lately. And I do have high hopes for the miniseries. There were things that didn't make sense in this movie, like the plot, which was unrealistic as it is. While the New York Comic-Con scene at the end didn't make much sense, despite I'm in the scene. But what didn't make sense about it was how they could get in without a pass in for Comic-Con in the first place, as I'll never get over that. That was so fucking irritating. The movie was raunchy, crude, and disgusting as a sequel to an R-rated raunchy comedy about a man asking for his teddy bear to come to life, as I never liked an R-rated raunchy humor of a bullshit movie for the last 10 years. And this proves my point, as this is a non-recommendation, but to be fair, A Million Ways to Die in the West was much worse than this. I will say that. If I were to review that movie, I would give that movie around like maybe early 2, late 1. If I review it one day, which I'm going to seriously hope not, that's where I would go with it. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and next time we'll be back with the Ted TV miniseries, and I'm seriously having high hopes because this is a prequel. I've never seen a prequel to a comedy, so maybe with an exception of Dumb and Dumber, but I'll get to that later. And until we ever get until we get there, I want everybody's heard about the bird, the bird's a word.